I'm going to start off with a question. You ready? Raise your hand if you've ever rented a car, rented an apartment, rented a house, or ever stayed at an Airbnb. You've ever rented anything. Raise your hand. Okay. Now, confession time. Did you treat that item as well as you treat what you own? Ooh, okay. I see some yeses, and I see some look of shame kind of looking down as well. I'll be honest. I would hope that, here in church, we would say yes. We would take care of other people's things as well as our own. But if you happen to be an Airbnb owner or, anywhere in that world, you know that people don't always take care of things they rent like they own. Okay, let me ask you this. Have you ever been in a work environment where somebody gave you the coaching and says, you need to act like an owner? I need you to think like an owner. You ever heard that before? Because here's what happens. There's a difference in how we view life when we're an owner or if we're a renter or a manager. So what we're going to do today, we're going to continue with our generosity series. John has done a great job walking us through in week 1, talking about how God owns everything. And we actually looked at the life of David, how David became an example of generosity that others followed. Last week, we looked at contentment, what it means to live a life that is content, that is satisfied with what God has given us. And then we talked through the tithe and what it means to give proportionally. Today, we're actually going to bring those two things together into something that's, it's countercultural. Like it's one of those things that Scripture teaches that sometimes our society just doesn't get. It just doesn't understand. And that's the concept of what it means to be a faithful steward. Because our society praises ownership, right? Have you ever been in that awkward spot where maybe you're renting a home, renting an apartment, and someone comes to you, oh, so when are you going to buy something? As if it's like the foregone conclusion that you have to buy something. Or maybe you've been in that spot, you're a manager at a company, and everyone's like, hey, when are you going to go out and start your own company? Now, I'm going to be honest, I have nothing against ownership. That's not the point. But I have to look at why does our culture value ownership so much that it discounts being a steward or a manager. And here's this is my thought. Let's see if you agree. I believe that our culture values ownership so much because ownership is control. See, think about it. When I own something, right, I get to set the rules. I get to set the direction. If I own my house, I get to pick the paint color on the wall. If I'm in a work situation, I'm the boss. Guess what? Nobody can tell me no. I set the rules. And I've got to be honest. When I go through the fruits of the Spirit, and I think, love, joy, peace, control everything, patience, kindness, nobody can tell me no, gentle. It doesn't sound right, does it? Our culture has pushed us into a framework, into a way of thinking that is actually contrary to what Scripture speaks. Because as we walk through the series on generosity, it doesn't work, it doesn't make sense that if our end goal is always for ourselves. But I think we live a life that has more stress. I think we live a life with more anxiety because we're actually living under a framework of this world more so than the framework that Scripture gives us in response to our resources and our wealth. So let's walk through, and I want to talk through this idea of stewardship because I believe there is freedom that we can find when we live life as a steward as God's created us. So let's talk through what I mean by a steward, because we don't use that word. We use words like manager, renter, or words like that, but a steward, unless you're on a plane, you don't think of steward at all. But when we talk in a scriptural sense, a steward is someone who faithfully uses their time, their talents, and their resources given by God to serve the best interest of His kingdom. And this is the hardest part today, that God's given us abilities. And because we're in a generosity series, we're going to kind of narrow the scope down to our resources, although you could have the same conversation with time. You could have the same conversation with our talents and abilities. But we live with a pressure to use what God has given us for his kingdom rather than my own. So let's walk through what it includes, what would be included in this idea of stewardship. It's where I do and where I don't spend my money. It's how generous I am in using my income to help others. How do I invest my resources to provide for the future? How do I use my home to bless others? And how do I give back a portion of what God has given me in the tithe? So a lot of different things we can talk about here, but one of the clearest pictures and the clearest definitions of what it means to be a steward is actually found in Matthew 25. Jesus is going through a story, and he's giving examples of what it means to be a member of God's kingdom. And he gives this parable of 3 stewards. So if you'd like to follow along, we'll be in Matthew 25, and we'll read through this. Jesus says, "Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. And then he left on his trip. The servant who received 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip, and he called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant whom he had trusted 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 bags, and the master said, 'You gave me 5 bags of silver to invest. I have earned 5 more.' The master was full of praise. 'Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling a small amount. Now I'll give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together.' And the servant who had received 2 bags of silver came forward and said, 'Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest. I have earned 2 more.' And the master said, 'Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling a small amount. So now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together.' Then the servant with 1 bag of silver came and said, 'Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you did not plant, gathering crops you did not cultivate. And I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is what's yours.' But the master replied, 'You wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops where I didn't plant and gather crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money into the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it.' Then he ordered the money to be taken from the servant and give it the one with 10 bags." So it's an amazing story, and there's several points we could bring out, but I look at what these servants were told to do. The master left on a long trip. He entrusted his wealth for the purpose of investing in his kingdom, in growing his kingdom. And you see the first 2, they're rewarded for their effort, right? They brought in different amounts. One brought in 5 bags, one brought in 2 bags. They received the same reward. Both were praised, and both were given additional responsibility and authority. And then we get to this third one. And you see what I would call his excuse. "Well, I know you were a harsh man, and I was afraid of losing your money, so he buried it." But I have to ask the question, if he knew that this was a harsh man, if that was the reality, then why didn't he do what he said and invest it in the bank? Here's my problem with this story when we look at the third person here. What did he do after he buried the money? The other 2 spent time, we have no idea, whether it's months or years, whatever the time span is in this story, they spent that time working for the master's best interest, for the best interest of his kingdom. This other one buried the money and then did whatever he wanted to do. The truth is, it wasn't out of fear, but I believe it's what the master says here, and he calls them lazy. That he actually took the money, put it away, and then spent that time on whatever he wanted. He was an unfaithful steward. I love what author Matthew Kim says. "Stewardship is not simply paying our dues. Rather, it is tending our soul so that we can see wealth properly as an instrument to invest in God's kingdom. If this is true, when we talk about stewardship, when we talk about wealth, this is not a financial issue. We're not talking about the dollars where you make little, you make a lot, you make somewhere in the middle. No, we're talking about a soul issue. How do we view our wealth? How do we view our resources? Do we view those as the first two servants, as instruments to be used to advance our master's kingdom? Or do we use those to advance our own kingdom? That's why I call this a soul issue. In Deuteronomy, God is speaking to the Israelites, and he's recounting their time in the wilderness. And in that time, God provided manna every day for food. In that time, their clothes never wore out, and their shoes, despite walking all the time, never wore out. If you have kids, wouldn't that be a blessing right there for shoes that never wore out? They just grew with the kid. That'd be amazing. But here's what he says in Deuteronomy 8. God did all these things so you would never say to yourself, I have achieved this wealth with my own strength and energy. Remember the Lord your God. He is the one who gives you power to be successful in order to fulfill the covenant he confirmed to your ancestors with an oath. God has given us it all. God has given us the strength and the ability, and it is our role as a steward that in our soul we understand why God has given us that, and that we seek to build his kingdom with what he's entrusted into us. So the question's why? Why do we struggle so much? Why is it that every day my thought is, how do I wake up and how do I build my own kingdom? I mean, let's be honest. How many of you are already looking at Black Friday deals for yourself? Oh, come on. There's got to be at least one hand on that one, right? The truth is, there we go. Thank you. Our sinful nature tempts us to use God's resources to build our own kingdom. And this is the temptation we fight. And this is not an American culture thing. I think this is a human heart issue. We see in Genesis 1:28, God blessed them, Adam and Eve. And he said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it. And reign over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the animals, and all that scurry across the ground. This is what a lot of theologians look like. This is the commissioning of humanity. God has given us a charge to steward, to care for his creation. But we see not only 3 chapters later, that was already twisted in the fall. And if I go all the way to what the Apostle Paul's pastoral advice to Timothy was, he said, you should know this, Timothy, that in the last days it will be very difficult times. For people will love only themselves and their money. I know those words were written 2,000-something years ago, but do you think they're still true today? We're battling a heart issue. And so often what happens, and I'll speak for my life, I go to one of two extremes. On one side, I lean into the performance mentality, right? It's me versus everyone else. It's I can't stop or I won't get ahead. And we fight that. In fact, again, this is as old as time. King Solomon, 3,000 years ago. Then I observed that most people are motivated to succeed because they envy their neighbors. Again, do you think that is still true today? We lean towards this way, and we want more only because, well, I got to be better than them. I mean, Solomon coined keeping up with the Joneses before there were any families called the Joneses, okay? But there's another side to this. One side, this performance mentality, we got to keep going, we got to keep building, got to have more wealth. The other side is what I would call the extreme frugal mentality. All wealth is bad, all spending is bad. Save everything, don't throw anything out. Here's my issue. No matter which way you go, the root of it is what you want. The root is selfishness. The root is I get to control what is going on and how I use these funds and what gets done. That is the heart issue. That when we talk about stewardship, when we talk about generosity, that is the actual fight. So what do we do? I believe that God has given us some disciplines or some practices that we kind of lump into this category of stewardship that help us fight the sin issue, that help us fight this internal desire to always want more, to always want control, and to use what God has given us for the benefit of his kingdom, but yet we use it for our own. Okay, you ready for confession time number 2? Don't raise your hands on this. Who has a regular habit of going to the gym? Oh, I'm like, guys, this is the wrong time of year to talk about that one. Ask me in January. No, okay. When I'm practicing a discipline, my goal is something greater than the discipline itself. What I mean by that is I go to the gym not because I love exercising, but because I want the strength and agility and stamina gained by working out. I eat right not because I love salad, because I really don't. But I want the health benefits of a healthier life, and I want to see my doctor far less, okay? The discipline is a practice that gets us to a goal that is greater than the practice itself, okay? When we talk about spiritual disciplines, I pray because prayer teaches me how to surrender my will to God. I study Scripture because Scripture teaches me how to let go of my truths, but grab onto His truths. In stewardship, the practices of stewardship require me to surrender control over my wants and focus on the needs of others. That is what the discipline of stewardship does. So what does it look like? I got just 3. I'm a good preacher, right? You're always in 3s. I got 3 things, very practical things we can do, but the first one is probably going to confuse you a little bit. So you guys ready for this? Okay, come on, give me a little more than that. Okay, here we go. The first one, if we're going to practice stewardship, here's a discipline in our life. The first one, enjoy life. Okay? How many preachers have you walked out of a sermon like, well, if I don't give everything to the poor, then I guess I'm not doing what God asked? You ever felt that way before? Am I the only one? Okay, maybe I'm the only one. You guys have heard some good preachers. No, we are to enjoy life, enjoy the blessings. Don't forget, even in this parable, the first 2 were rewarded, and they were entered into the Master's kingdom. There was joy in what they did. I'm going to lean back on Solomon here and what he says in Ecclesiastes. Even so, I've noticed one thing, at least it is good. It is good for people to eat, drink, and enjoy the work under the sun during the short life God has given them, and to accept their lot in life. And this is a good thing, to receive wealth from God, and a good health, and to enjoy it. To enjoy your work and accept your lot in life. This is indeed a gift from God. Listen, God has given you a certain level of blessing in this life. It's okay to enjoy that, because that is part of our stewardship, to enjoy the blessings that God has given. It's just like a parent who wants to bless their children with a gift. The last thing you'd want to see as a parent is them take that toy and put it away and not use it and act like that's a virtue, right? It's okay to enjoy what God has given you faithfully. There's another practice, and that is the practice of making a habit to bless others. In fact, I'm going to make real specific. This is something I got out of a book, and I've tried to do this. 3 people a week. Work to bless 3 people a week. And this doesn't have to be big. This doesn't have to even be financial. This may be a note. This may be picking up a lunch. This may be just being aware of a need in their life and then fulfilling that need however you can. But there's something that comes with the awareness that I am looking each and every week for 3 people that I can bless. It opens our eyes. It takes our focus off of ourselves. And it keeps us looking towards others. Now, I'm going to be honest. If we're going to do this, and you're going to make a practice of blessing 3 people a week, I have one more challenge for you. And that is generosity part of your budget? Now, I'm not talking about the tithe. We'll get to that in a moment. That's something totally different. But generosity, do you have money set aside to be generous? Whether this is a large or small line item. If not, what's going to happen is that you're going to be going around and you're going to see a need. And in that instance, you're going to have to make a choice. Well, I was planning to spend the money on this. I had bookmarked the money. I wanted to do this or go here on this trip, but maybe I could. And you're going to deal with this internal struggle. Just take care of it on the front end. Take your budget. Have some funds there for generosity. Because when I call this a discipline, it is a discipline of letting go. It is a discipline of saying, yes, there are some things that I would want because wants are endless, right? Okay? There's always more you could want. But you're going to take part of that income. You're going to make a disciplined practice to say, no, this part of what I have is to be generous and to just bless other people. Unmerited grace is what a blessing is. So there's one practice. Or two, enjoy life. Make a habit out of blessing others. Okay, now the third one's going to sting a little bit. Okay, you still with me? Hold on. Be faithful to the tithe and give proportionally. Now, I know John spoke about this last week, so I'm not going to go into the details, but I will be honest, this is a tough one for a lot of people. So if this is something you want more conversation about, you just want to understand what Scripture says about it, hey, call the office, make an appointment, we'll sit down, we'll walk through it. But here's why I believe the tithe is so important. It is something as old as, the first record is really the time of Abraham, okay? Thousands of years. There's just been that idea of the 10th. And I believe it is part of the discipline of letting go. Because again, my human nature, my sinful nature always wants more. It always wants to grab onto. How do you fight that? How do you kind of let go of that social society pressure to always have more? Well, it's to do something very countercultural. And it's to intentionally let go. And I believe the tithe is that practice, that it reminds us every time money comes in that, hey, we need to give this back to God. Sure, the tithe helps provide for the needs of the church and the gospel work throughout the world, and there's all the logistics of it, but that's not its primary purpose. I believe its primary purpose is what it does in us, is I have a regular practice of letting go, showing that I trust God more than I trust in those resources. The tithe is important because of what it does in us. So 3 things. Enjoy life. Make a habit to bless others. And bring the tithe. Those are all things that require us to let go. But I believe there's more we gain in that letting go. Because the question is, where is your heart? As you hear this, if your heart's desire is like trying to hold on, okay, there's probably still a little work to be done. And in case you're nervously looking around to see if you're the only one, no, it's all of us. So if we're going to live as a steward, ultimately, why would I sacrifice? Why would I give in? Why wouldn't I just take that extra money and go on some great vacations, right? Because I could relax on a great vacation. That could be part of my, health. But I actually believe living as a steward, seeing the resources that God has given me as intended to advance His kingdom, I think it actually frees me from the stress of seeking more. One more time. If you haven't read the book of Ecclesiastes, I encourage you to do it. It's a hard book at times. It can be a little depressing at times, but boy, it's got some practical stuff. Look what Solomon says. Those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. The more you have, the more people will come to help you spend it. Okay? Maybe you've seen that before. So what good is wealth except perhaps to watch it slip through your fingers? People who work hard sleep well, whether they eat little or much. But the rich seldom get a good night's sleep. Here's another serious problem I've seen under the sun. Hoarding riches harms the saver. Money is put into risky investments and turns sour, and everything is lost. In the end, there is nothing left to pass on to one's children. We all come to the end of our lives naked and empty-handed as on the day we were born. We can't take our riches with us. Whether rich or poor, whether a spender or a saver, if that is our goal, we're always going to live with the stress that God never intended us to shoulder. But if I want to find freedom, yes, the disciplines of being a steward are painful at first because we're fighting that sin nature within us. But I believe there's joy because there's freedom in shifting our focus from wealth and status to advancing his kingdom. Because think of it this way. As I'm able to be generous, I'm able to see a community transformed as we're able to go out and serve the community in greater ways and just be a blessing to those around us. I'm able to fund work of the gospel all around the world so that people who don't know it, who haven't seen it, who don't have a Bible in their language can receive that. I'm able to finance buildings that will serve for ministry purposes long after my time. And as I focus on God's kingdom, I get to bless others, demonstrating the grace of God. There's a joy and a blessing in focusing our life and how we can serve others and how we grow his kingdom. So as we wrap up, I got to say the end goal of stewardship, the whole reason we talk about a generosity series is because of the change it makes in us. This isn't about more money for the church. This isn't about chastising anybody for where they spend their money and how they spend it. But it's about turning our hearts and turning the way that we see wealth. So stewardship does both. It works in our hearts, and it provides for the needs of others. But all it does is it calls us to be willing to let go. Now in the end, hey, we all want the reward, right? It's like when we started with the parable of the servants, of the stewards. There is a reward for their faithfulness. So as we kind of close out, I have to ask the question. At the end of our days, whose reward are we really seeking? Because we have a choice. We can build our kingdom. We can use everything at our disposal, and we can build the kingdom of me, whatever that looks like. But in the end, do I want the rewards of my kingdom? Or do I want the rewards of his kingdom? Jesus said, no one can serve two masters. For you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. And I love the way it's phrased there, enslaved to money. Because it grabs us and it holds us. So there's wisdom here in what Jesus said. Where's your heart directed? What has you? So as we're going to take a moment, band's going to close out with a song here. Just take this time. Maybe this is a time of prayer. Maybe this is a time of reflection. But here's just a question to think of. What is your next step in living as a steward who seeks the best interest of their king?